Hello, I'm Olivia Mattis, representing the Sousa Mendes Foundation. I hope everybody's having a lovely day. You may notice that I'm not in my usual spot. We just had sort of an internet crisis where half my neighborhood is out of internet, and so I had to quickly run to the library. So I'm at my local library, and this is a good opportunity for me to urge people to support their local libraries. It's a great institution. So today we have a very interesting program. We're dealing with a problematic figure, Walter Winchell. He had his ups and downs in his career, as you saw in the film and as we will discuss in this hour. We're here to honor something that he did that was very important at the time when Nazi propaganda was taking real hold in the United States with the rise of the German American Bund. Walter Winchell used his voice, the power of one, to make a big difference in history. And that's what we're here to celebrate. I won't introduce our illustrious speakers. I'll let our moderator have the privilege of doing that. Our moderator is Mr. Felix Pfeifle. He has moderated several of our programs in the past. He was a personal friend of Otto von Habsburg, the politician, the former Crown Prince of Austria. And he has a profound knowledge, Felix does, of 20th century history and World War II history and good guys and bad guys. And so I'm delighted that he has agreed to moderate today's program. So Felix, take it away.
Thank you so much. Walter Winchell. Funny that Olivia should mention good guys and bad guys because Walter Winchell managed to be both, it would seem. I think today we're here to emphasize the good that he did, and that was in being a massive, perhaps the primary force in persuading Americans to turn away from the potential of Nazism that was threatening our country. Of course, you're going to learn from our speakers how Franklin Delano Roosevelt used Walter Winchell's voice to help achieve that. Walter Winchell went on, or before even the matter of the Nazis came in, he had a very strong voice for the poor, for the working man during the Great Depression, and for democracy. He also fought for civil rights. He was a solid, staunch supporter of civil rights, shall we say, up till about the minute that he got into a fracas with Josephine Baker, in which then we see his perhaps pathological narcissism, my diagnosis, overtake his better senses, in which he then pursued Josephine Baker as being perhaps communist, which ties in then to his activities with Senator Joseph McCarthy and the communist Red Scare. What I find very interesting about that, though, is that Walter Winchell had what I think a good moral and political compass up through his involvement with Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the matter of Nazis. I also think that his in aligning with Senator McCarthy in the beginning, if we think of communism in those times, Stalinist communism, as a totalitarian society, it would make sense that Walter Winchell would speak against it and perhaps go on this pursuit with Senator McCarthy. One would imagine from day one, Senator McCarthy may have seemed like he was on some kind of legitimate pursuit. It did not turn out that way. I'll let Ben and Arnie speak to the rest, and I will introduce my speakers now. Our first speaker is Ben LOETERMAN, who produced and directed the film I hope you've all seen, Walter Winchell, The Power of Gossip, for the PBS series American Masters. He holds 2 Emmy Awards for directing and also for investigative journalism, 2 Columbia DuPont Awards for his films about the 9/11 attacks, and Amnesty International's Humanitarian Spotlight Award for The Triumph of Evil, about how US policy actively enabled the genocide in Rwanda. His current film is about US propaganda censorship and the atomic bomb, called Bombshell. Our next speaker will be Arnie Bernstein, an historian and author with a passion for uncovering overlooked stories from America's past. His critically acclaimed works include Swastika Nation, Fritz Kuhn and the Rise and Fall of the German American Bund, and Bath Massacre, America's first school bombing. This is his book, which I've enjoyed very much reading, Swastika Nation. Arnie has been honored by the Illinois State Library Center for the Book and the State Library of Michigan. He appears on as an expert in many programs, especially in PBS, and their documentary, The American Fuhrer, Hitler's Deputy in America. He has served as a panelist for webinars hosted by New York's Museum of Jewish Heritage and was interviewed on the podcast Star-Spangled Fascism. We will begin with a clip of the man about whom we're going to be talking, Walter Winchell. This clip is so revealing. It shows us his body language, what he looked like and what he spoke like, the charisma he had.
Mr. North and South American, all the ships at sea, let's go to press. Dallas, Texas.
Winchell gets his own program, a televised version of his radio show.
New York City, hear this. Dorothy Parker, the famous playwright and poet, will make a speech in New York on the 17th at a hall in Greenwich Village, probably on 4th Street, on behalf of the communists now in American jails for conspiring to overthrow the United States. Good girl, good girl.
Hi, I'm Ben Loderman. I'm the film's director. I forgot, and maybe some of us have, how quickly Walter Winchell can talk. It feels like we should play that back at half speed sometime. But my parents and people of their generation could tell you at least one thing about Winchell, and that was, "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all the ships at sea." That was his signature line, and that's what he was known for. Our film set out to find out what else he did and who he was and what is his legacy. So I think for a bit of perspective, it's worth going back not too far to just last week when there was news about Jimmy Kimmel returning to the air after being suspended by Disney. His return show attracted 6.2 million viewers, which is 4 times, it says, his average numbers, which means his average numbers were about 1 million to 1.5 million or so people. So now consider this. The most famous name in America after Roosevelt, 50 years ago, is now completely forgotten. My kids don't know who Walter Winchell is. But his is really the origin story of the fractured fake news media circus that we all tolerate today. Neil Gabler, Winchell's biographer, told me that Winchell wasn't just there at the beginning of what has become today's media circus. He largely invented it. That's Walter Winchell. So much so that in 1940, The New Yorker did a profile of Winchell. It's a 6-part profile. It's the longest profile The New Yorker has ever done of anybody. And it calls Winchell's brand a new form of journalism. At his height, his daily newspaper column and his weekly radio show had a combined audience of 50 million people, compared to Jimmy Kimmel's 1.5. 2 out of 3 every Americans. So if you begin to think about it, and you begin to think about the recent combined audiences we could add up of the Rush Limbaughs, the Howard Sterns, the Rachel Maddows, the Oprah Winfreys, the Jon Stewarts, the Sean Hannitys, the Stephen Colberts, left, right, and otherwise, they don't come close to adding up to the singular influence and persuasion that Winchell wielded throughout the Great Depression, World War II, and McCarthyism. His rise and fall and his career's rise and fall embody today's fast-paced, celebrity-driven, politically charged circus of the media. So the arc of his story and his outside flaws remain truly fascinating, if not very well known. He was a Jewish immigrant kid who grew up in East Harlem. He fancied himself a Broadway dancer, but he kind of knew inside he was never really that good. And so did his wife, which is why for her birthday she bought him his first typewriter. She knew what he was good at, and that was gossip. And that's what he did. He would go behind stage during their vaudeville acts and pin up notes about who was seeing whom, who was doing what with whom, who was jealous about whom, and that was his forte. In 1919, he began to monetize that skill and began selling some of his bits to newspapers. He basically invented a new form of newspaper writing and then eventually radio delivery. He created slangs where falling in love becomes pashing it or garboing it, while newlyweds are said to await a blessed event or the stork, unless, of course, their relationship is going or is about to be renovated, as in Reno, Nevada, which is where people once went particularly to get divorced. Winchell's career takes off with a tabloid, the New York Evening Graphic, and that becomes his springboard to the Hearst Daily Mirror, which he then is able to leverage into a syndication deal, which gives him 50% of the profit of his columns that are syndicated. That's the key to Winchell's fortune and to his leap to a new medium that rises in the 30s, radio. So a quarter of the words in our script are Walter Winchell's. The film was produced during COVID. It was very hard to produce logistically. And so we went back to the man himself and used him as our biggest source. We only know his words particularly because of a coincidence of circumstances. Neil Gabler, who was Winchell's biographer and one of our main interviews in the film, is an intrepid and sleuthing biographer. Years ago, he heard that to pay her bills, Winchell's daughter Walda was auctioning off all his stuff, including some fat notebooks in which Winchell himself pasted every column and every radio script he ever wrote. Gabler bought those at the auction, and he used them as the source for his biography. After finishing the book in '94, Gabler had no more room in his garage, so he donated the books to the Billy Rose collection at the New York Public Library. Our great stroke of luck was a few years ago, the public library digitized all those notebooks, and that made the words suddenly easily accessible to us as filmmakers. Easy to word search, easy to find, otherwise impossible to walk through the forest and know where we were. Gabler told us a story that he couldn't confirm, so it's not in the book, it's not in our film, about one night when Winchell was holding court at his haunt, the Stork Club in New York, when about 9 p.m. or so, he gets a call from someone who claims to be an FBI agent. And to confirm that, the agent tells Winchell, call me back at FBI headquarters, which Winchell does. And the agent says, the new president, Franklin Roosevelt, would like to see you in his office tomorrow at 9 a.m. This is about 9:10 at night, the night before. So Winchell says, no problem. Suddenly calls his dry cleaner, gets him out of bed, goes down to the dry cleaning place, gets out the one suit that Winchell owns, hops on a 3 o'clock train out of Penn Central, gets down to D.C., walks into the Oval Office, and casual as anything says, what can I do for you, Mr. President? And Roosevelt looks him in the eye, and Roosevelt says, Mr. Winchell, I'd like your audience. So they talked, and Winchell taught him how to speak directly to Mr. and Mrs. America. Speak right over the press. Don't hold press conferences. Find a way to talk to the Americans directly. And that was the inciting idea for FDR's development of fireside chats. Once Winchell became convinced that he's being taken seriously by the likes of Roosevelt, he then wants to get serious. He's very chuffed with Roosevelt's attention. So his craving for gossip begins to give way to a craving for power. And with FDR, he gets it. He's a strong voice through the Great Depression. He speaks loud and clearly for Roosevelt's domestic agenda. And when Hitler seems to be coming to power, it's Winchell first among the press corps in America who starts to wield his power viciously against Hitler. He attacks his manhood. He calls him a fairy and a this and a that. And he's really the first commentator in this country to rage against Hitler, and especially Hitler's American surrogate, Fritz Kuhn. But once FDR dies and Hitler gets defeated, Winchell seems to be left without a North Star or an outsized foe. He's a bit forlorn, and he falls back into his old habit of true crime reporting. His breakthrough there was an important news story he broke when he went down and covered in person and stayed for weeks at the trial of the Limburg baby kidnapper. He would have dinner every night with FBI agents, with the prosecutors, and then he would share that news. But he had been known for being clever and cheeky and good-looking in his youth, but now he was beginning to age a bit, and his cheekiness was beginning to morph into nastiness. He continues to hold court at the Store Club, and by chance he meets a very young Roy Cohn, who is the assistant to young Senator Joe McCarthy. Roy Cohn decides he wants to connect Winchell and McCarthy. And again, Winchell hitches himself to power because he thinks McCarthy could well become the next president, and he could forge a relationship like he did with Roosevelt. But when McCarthy's star tumbles dramatically, so does Winchell's. Winchell meets failure, really, only when he attempts to jump to television during this time. He has several shots at it, different format shows, variety shows, talk shows, thriller shows, but Winchell is simply, by this point, not telegenic. And all that crazy energy we heard in the first clip that he was projecting so positively, so forcefully on the radio, on television began to look manic. And Winchell began to look bordering on crazy. Eventually, Winchell lost his TV contracts, and then slowly his radio show, and then in a final insult, his column when the newspaper printers struck the Hearst chain. Winchell wrote then that that was his death, losing his voice, losing his media voice. He became reclusive, and succumbed to cancer 9 years later, but that was really just an afterthought. There were really no friends or family left for his funeral or at the end. His name and his influence faded away, but his true influence endures today in his legacy. And I think it's worth noting that the best example of that I've seen is Philip Roth's book called The Plot Against America. It's something that HBO has turned into a limited series. And without giving away too much, I will say that the plot line veers to a point late in the story where Walter Winchell is running against Charles Lindbergh for president. Back to you, Felix.
Thank you so much, Ben. And who knew that we were saved from the Nazis not precisely by FDR and Winchell, but by the dry cleaner who got that suit ready and put him on a train to Washington, D.C. In fact, I think I took a note there. I'm going to get my dry cleaner's cell phone number. All right. Thank you so much, Ben. Next, we are going to meet the primary Nazi, the leading Nazi of the United States. And we are going to see a clip of him, after which Arnie Bernstein, whom I've already introduced, will speak for us.
Across America, children at summer camps are learning archery, rifle practice, and Nazi doctrine.
They resemble Hitler youth camps. There are all the symbols and the flag carrying and the uniform wearing, the Heil Hitler salute.
The German American Bund had anywhere from 30 to 50,000 members, and it's basically a fifth column of Nazis operating in America.
The Bund's leader is former German soldier Fritz Kuhn.
Fritz Kuhn is the self-appointed American Führer who wants to bring Nazism to America. Winchell's relentless in making fun of Führer Fritz Kuhn.
Kuhn Nazi, the Shamerican, swastikas, swastikutis, Hitlerrutis. The Hitlerites are Mädchens in uniform.
And so we introduce Arnie Bernstein.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. Now, Fritz Kuhn, there was a good introduction of him. He was part Popinjay, part dead serious leader. He was, what he did was take a previous organization called Friends of New Germany, which was causing a lot of problems for the Hitler government. So they had it dissolved. Then Kuhn saw his opportunity, took in what was formerly the Friends of New Germany, retitled it the German American Bund, saying that it was on American principles. He claimed a lot of things. He was when in front of American cameras, he was an American. Behind the scenes, it was Nazi all the way. He had pictures of Hitler in his office, things like that. He claimed to his followers, and I want you to make a mental note of this. He claimed to his followers that he followed Hitler into the beer hall Putsch. This is German American Bund Parade. This was in the Yorkville neighborhood, around 86th Street or so. And you can see that in the front, the people are, riveted to it, and there's cops with their billy clubs. And there's people on the sidewalk just walking by or looking out of curiosity. There were these parades all over the place. In Soldier Field, where I live in Chicago, there was an enormous rally that was held there. And it was part of America. It was part of what people knew this Bund as. Now, this was Camp Siegfried. They had a lot of private camps that were for families and, and the children's camps that they were talking about before. Now, this is the most famous one, was Camp Siegfried in Yaphank, New York. Adolf Hitler Street. They also had Joseph Goebbels Street and Himmler Street. Every major Nazi got their street. And there was Kuhn reviewing the troops. They were known as the OD, a German name I cannot pronounce, but they were called OD for short. They were their versions of the SS. and they were the bodyguards and the enforcers. And here's a typical day at Sunday afternoon at the Bund camp. They had rallies. They had basically every weekend was an Oktoberfest, and they had various auctions, things like that, raffles. It looked like any other kind of camp, except it has this Nazi twist. Now here's the children that we were talking about earlier. Here's a couple of the young boys raising a flag with the Iron Cross. Their uniforms were designed after the Hitler Youth uniforms. And these are the various categories of the children's organizations. Now, one thing about this that is probably one of the most dark aspects of the German American Bund, and there were a lot of dark aspects, there was sexual abuse going on with these children. They were encouraging them to have babies so that they could build the new version, the new generation of Bundists. Hitler was doing the same thing. It was called the baby policy, and good enough for Hitler, good enough for the German American Bund. But these girls were sexually abused by some of the adult leaders as well. Now, the Bundeswehr meets der Führer in Berlin, August 1936. It was the Olympics, and Kuhn and a contingent of his people went there to represent America and represent the Bund. They had hoped to get a meeting with Hitler. Now, a former member of the Friends of New Germany, friend of Kuhn, repatriated back to Germany, excuse me. He was able to pull some strings and get this meeting with Hitler. And here's a sentence you will rarely hear. To Hitler's credit, he had no idea who these people were. It was just like any other politician. Okay, these people will be coming in, sir. This is what they'll say. And you say some niceties to them and give them your autographed picture, which is what happened. Now, he was known as der Führer. Now, Kuhn wanted to be a Führer, but of course, nobody could be the Führer but, Hitler. So he took on the title Bundesführer. And as Bundesführer, he was in charge of everything. There was something called the leadership principle, where you followed whatever the leader said, no matter what. He was in control of meetings, of this, of that, and the finances as well. So Hitler meets with them, listens to what they do, they give him a couple presents, and then he says, go back and continue your work. Kuhn takes this as Hitler's blessing, that go back, you are my arm in America, which they weren't. It was just an offhand remark by Hitler. Now, the big event, and ultimately led to Kuhn's downfall, was a Free America rally to be celebrated on George Washington's birthday on February 20th, 1939. It was at Madison Square Garden. There's a poster that was advertising for it. On the other side, you'll see the Free America booklet with all the speeches in it that was handed out. And in the middle, you can see Workers of New York, Stop the Fascists. There was an enormous crowd out there wanting to get in. So let's take a couple pictures. Okay, this was the rally. You can see that picture of George Washington. He's almost glowing. And members of the OD beneath him with their American flags. 20,000 people were inside. Bund numbers were, Kuhn said there were, 500,000, which is, of course, a gradation. But the feeling was there were maybe 30 to 50 nationwide. And there were, were they active members? Were they silent members who helped fund the Bund? There were certainly those kinds of people as well. But they managed to get 20,000 in to hear all these speeches. And if you could zoom in on those flags, if you can see, yeah, there we go. On either side is like the Betsy Ross flag. On the far ends. On the middle are the American flags, the 48 stars of then, surrounding Washington. And in the center is the swastika, a swastika flag and the Bund symbol, all sweeping upward. This was, and you can see on the side there it says Free America, which is what they shouted. And there were signs you can't see here, but Jew Free America, things like that. It was what it was. Now again, 20,000 inside. outside. Yeah, you can pull back. Estimated 100,000 people are outside wanting to kill him. You can see all the horses there. A horse got punched, actually, by the way. Somebody was arrested for punching a horse. But this 100,000 estimated was really an amalgamation of New York. You had everything. You had college students. You had bands of Trotskyites, bands of veterans. You had, housewives, businessmen, you name it, they were there, wanting to get inside and, have their way with the Bundists. Now, Louis J. Valentine, who was the police commissioner, said that no one should worry. We have enough people to stop a revolution here. This was the biggest show of police force until 9/11 in New York City. Isidore Greenbaum. He's kind of a hero of the night. He was Jewish, kind of a jack of all trades, drove a cab, was plumber, all kinds of things. Police all knew him. Everybody knew him. He was able to get a ticket and get inside the garden. When he bought the ticket, actually, he hit his nose like that so that people wouldn't see. He had this enormous, Jewish nose. He got in, he worked his way up to the front and leaped onto the stage when Kuhn started speaking. You grabbed the microphone cords. Kuhn was a bit flustered. And you can see that the OD went after him. It looked like a scene out of Berlin, in the streets of Berlin, and the audience was cheering and roaring. They were thrilled that this was going on. Greenbaum, they basically saved his life. You can see his pants are torn off there. He was thrown into the arms of the New York police, took him down to the station, and took him down to night court. And the judge said to him, "Do you know what you could have caused by what you were saying and the disturbance you caused?" And to which Greenbaum said, "Do you know what he could cause by the things that he's saying up on that stage?" Now, the judge gave him either 10 days in jail or a $25 fine. Well, his friends and neighbors started chipping in, but so did the cops. Many of them knew him, and they gave him, they all managed to get his bail together, and he was released. Years later, when he was in World War II, he was interviewed by Stars and Stripes, and he said, "A lot of people wanted to do what I did. Well, I did it." He was quite proud of this throughout his entire life. Now, 100,000 people disturbing the peace in New York, you can't have that. So, and 20,000 Nazis inside the garden, can't have that. Now, LaGuardia and Mayor LaGuardia and District Attorney Thomas Dewey, who later became governor and ran for president, they went into the back offices and hatched a plan. Yes, stay there for a moment. They thought they could get Kuhn on taxes. All the ephemera and things that were sold by the Bund and at the rally, things like that. And they had a lot of, the same way they got Capone. Couldn't get him on free speech. You have a right to be obnoxious. But they thought, we can get him on taxes. Dewey said, no. We can get him on something even deeper than this. So they started digging. Kuhn's downfall, like everything else, the girlfriends. Remember what I said about the leadership principle in charge of all the money? Well, I guess you could say he was a chick magnet. Who knows why? But he had that spark. Now, these were two of his girlfriends who ended up being, they discovered that these were the ones that he was filtering money to, and they took him in on embezzlement charges. Florence Camp, he called her the blonde angel. He met her actually when he was going over to Germany for a meeting. And then there's Virginia, Overshine, Patterson, Stark, Blank, Seeger, Gilbert, Kahn, Cogswell, who was involved with Fritz Kuhn for a while. And she later added Raymond and Kaplan to her names. She was married 9 times, and there was a column she wrote about what it was like to have nine husbands. In any event, they found that he was paying for her psychiatrist. They caught him on embezzlement. He was brought before the Dees Committee, which was the congressional committee it was forerunner of HUAC. They were looking into the German American Bund there. He kind of parried and played chess with them, verbal chess. When asked about the beer hall putsch, he said, "I never was there," which of course he bragged to the Bund members that he was. Okay, next. He was found guilty of embezzlement and forgery, sentenced to 2.5 to 5 years for each count. You can see before and after. And then when he was, after he was released from Sing Sing, and after the war ended, his citizenship was, he was denaturalized. They took away his citizenship. He was sent to, oh, and Winchell, yeah, Winchell covered the trial. He had a blast. He wrote so many columns. One, he reviewed the trial as if he was a theater reviewer, and he wrote it in German dialect. And you could see some of the funny things that he wrote there. Okay. And to Fritz Kuhn, as you can see the things there, the most important thing there is that upon being deported, Kuhn says to the people guarding him, tell Herr Winchell I will live to piss on his grave, which is what was sent to Winchell, and Winchell repeated in his column. Kuhn died in 1951, but we didn't even find out in this country until 1953. This was what Winchell had to say at the end. Headline, Hitler's U.S. Bund chief Fritz Kuhn died friendless in Germany. Oh, the poor, poor fella. End of shrug. And that was it. And this is Winchell's grave. It's in Dignity Memorial in Phoenix, Arizona. It's a sad place. It's in the middle of a industrial park a couple miles from the airport. It's the last place you would expect Walter Winchell. His daughter buried them there because she was living in Phoenix at the time. The only solace you could find here is that Fritz Kuhn did not live to piss on Winchell's grave.
Great. Thank you so much, Arnie. Thank you, Ben. Fabulous, fascinating talks on, to me, a completely unknown subject. So thank you. Thank you for speaking to our audience.
Yeah, sure.
So now let me make my announcements if I could. So we have this wonderful book that we are selling. It's called The World Entire, and it's a story of our hero, Aristides de Souza Mendes. It's a book for children. It's a picture book, and it's really quite wonderful. So we're offering signed and inscribed copies of this book. Our intern Robin is going to put the link in the chat box of how you can order the book, and also when you get the email after today's program, there'll be a link there to order the book. So the author is Elizabeth Brown, and the artist, the illustrator, is Melissa Castrillon, and they've put together really a delightful book on the story of Aristides de Souza Mendes and the families that he saved. It makes a wonderful present, and we'll ask you what kind of inscription you would like and who it should be made out to. So I do urge you to get your own copy. Next, I want to talk to you about the programs we have upcoming in the month of October. We have 2 programs coming up in October. I'll tell you about both of them, and then we'll see a trailer for one of them. So on, let me see, Sunday, October 19th, that's our next program. It's called Music as Resistance, Reconstructing the Lost Music of Auschwitz. And it's quite a fascinating film and story. It's a story of a young British conductor and composer. His name is Leo Geyer, who spent 8 years doing a research project on what was the actual music that prisoners were forced to perform at Auschwitz, and how did they use music as a form of resistance. It's quite a brilliant research project, and the film is very touching. So I certainly urge you to sign up. 1 week following, we're turning to the story of Anne Frank. For those of you in the New York area, I highly urge you to see the exhibition that is now on view at the Center for Jewish History at 16th Street, all about Anne Frank, where they reconstruct her hiding place. And it's just so beautifully and sensitively done. I was blown away by the exhibit. So we're having the head of the YIVO archives at the Center for Jewish History, that's Jonathan Brent, who will be one of our speakers. We have a film called No Asylum, which is the unknown story about how the Frank family tried and tried to come to America before they ended up going into hiding. And unfortunately, America offered them no asylum. So obviously the Anne Frank story is a very sad story, and this is yet one more chapter, and it's not to be missed. So, but right now we're going to see a little trailer of the film called Lost Music of Auschwitz.
Auschwitz was the largest death camp the world has ever seen. Around 1.1 million people perished here. Of those, 1 million were Jewish, 70,000 were Polish, and 21,000 were Romani and Sinti people. Auschwitz was also home to at least 6 orchestras, formed of prisoners and commissioned by the Nazis. This music was part of the infrastructure of the camp. Music was weaponized. I'm a classical composer and conductor. For the last 8 years, I've been piecing together the fragments of the music manuscripts that remain. Hidden in the notes, there are many examples of where musicians rebelled, with secret performances and weaving forbidden melodies into concerts. All of these stories are very special. I've been trying to understand what the music would have sounded like in Auschwitz, so that we can finally hear this music, in some cases for the first time in 80 years. Following my conversations with survivors, one of the most important things for them is that we inherit the truth. Music is an abstract art form, and therefore music can speak beyond words. And with something so enormous and of such gravity as the Holocaust, actually music is helpful, I think, in a way in which we can understand and deal with it.
Leo Geyer himself will be our guest during that program, as will 2 of the musicians who are featured in the film itself. So again, not to be missed. But right now, we're going to go to Felix, who's going to manage our audience Q&A.
Thank you so much, Olivia. That film looks fascinating. I really look forward to that. I think I'm going to start with the hardball question, if I may, please. You know, just yesterday, I saw a video of brown shirts walking down the boardwalk oceanfront street in Long Beach. In a society where now I hear the right wing refer to anyone who's liberal as a communist, and the left wing, or perhaps other, referring to the right as fascists. Seems to me we're starting to see a lot of similarities between what was happening in New York City, especially, perhaps also in Chicago in the 1930s. We didn't talk about, there were the brown shirts marching, you know, Fritz Kuhn's people, but there were also a lot of Stalinist communists activating. Ben or Arnie, Ben and or Arnie, could either of you speak to the moment you traffic in these ideas? What parallels would you like to talk about?
Go ahead, Arnie.
That's a complex question to answer in a couple minutes, but
1 minute.
There are and there aren't parallels. Certainly, we had a different element going on with, you know, the looming of the war. People were certainly, united. I mean, there's a reason the Bund only lasted 3 years, and they were a small, loud minority, just like a lot of today's people are. It's a small but very loud minority. Quite a few differences, though. Kuhn hung out a shingle. Everybody knew where he was. Everybody knew where the Bund was. But today we have Twitter, X, or whatever you want to call it, all kinds of social media, uh, the things like that that they could have only dreamed of. And there's a lot on the underground. They aren't necessarily wearing brown shirts these days either. It's and as far as I'm concerned, it's both left and right that seem to be, doing these things in the tradition, I guess you could say, of what the Bund does, only with that advantage of the internet.
Thank you, Arnie. Ben, quickly.
Um, I think what Winchell did with his columns and his broadcasts was foment that kind of adversarial relationship you're talking about, Felix, and is probably the first time in popular American press that was happening. It's so odd that Winchell starts as such a fervent supporter of Roosevelt and then ends up really carrying McCarthy's water for him. That it's kind of hard to recognize that as anything other than a love of power more than a love of some philosophy.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. Between after Winchell moved on from Roosevelt to McCarthy. Now I'll go to the questions, some of the questions we have from here. Wasn't journalist Dorothy Thompson escorted out of this meeting, by which I understand the Nazi convocation in New York, and I see Arnie nodding yes. Is that
and laughing too. Oh yeah, she was. She was interviewed Hitler, and he ended up throwing her out of the country because of that, because of her interview. Well, she was actually going somewhere else that night, but she saw this was going on. She used a press pass to get in, and she started heckling, and people were furious with her. They now they had the Bundists come and the police come, and they basically threw her out. And when the police came, she just started laughing. She said, "Oh, come on, boys." And Winchell said that she should be nominated for the Pulitzer for what she did that night.
Thank you. Interesting question. One I have also had when I see Ben's film and I see all these young Nazis running around Long Island at a camp. I wonder what happened to these people. Where are they now? And Joanne Gilbert asks, were the Siegfried campers ever interviewed as adults?
They certainly wouldn't talk to somebody with a name like mine. But I don't know. I've never found anything.
Oh, thank you, Arnie. Yeah. Let's see. We see a comment here. There was a Nazi parade down Main Street in Northport, Long Island, New York in the 1930s. A comment by Ms. Kareen, which speaks to, I think, something either Ben or Arnie said, that these parades were taking place over in many towns across the country.
It's funny because the stories you're mentioning, Felix, form a small part of Winchell's window and Winchell's career and Winchell's life. But as Arnie knows as a historian, there's a much larger story there, and it's really been very hard for people to ferret out and tell in the kind of detail you're asking about.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I understand. I would encourage some more questions. This would be your last opportunity to lob a question at us. I see that Ms. Alpern was born on Winchell Street in Shaker Heights, Cleveland, Ohio. I wonder if that's a coincidence. There is, after all, also Winchell's Donuts, but I
Yeah.
wonder. So that actually is an interesting question. Did communities name their name since communities were naming streets after Nazis? Did they name streets after Winchell?
I don't think so, and you'd have to ask Dorothy whether she got a street after her. But I don't think Walter Winchell, toward the end of his life, was having many fans or friends, so I would bet against that one.
1954. This Ms. Alprin says that she grew up on or was born on Winchell Street in Shaker Heights. Maybe it was named after Winchell, Walter, because wasn't he still well within his fame in 1954? No?
Certainly, and if she wants to contact me or anyone listening does, I hope we'll find a way for people to reach me by email or at a website, and I'd be happy to look into it further and engage with them. So I
Thank you.
appreciate the question.
Thank you, Ben. An interesting question I took for granted because we've seen a film that explains it. But did listeners know Winchell was Jewish?
You know, it's funny. Winchell was not in any way or what he would call an observant Jew. Okay, so Winchell was not a religious Jew in any sense, but he neither trumpeted or hid his Jewishness, and nor did he while even attacking Hitler. Winchell tried. It's funny. Winchell's personal views, personal life, his personal infidelities, all the things he loved writing about others, he was very successful at keeping out of the papers and keeping out of the public eye. So he was Jewish, but he never wore it on his sleeve.
Right.
But it did end up on his tombstone. The Star of David is on his tombstone.
Let me jump in here because since I am in the library, they've come to tell me the library closes in 5 minutes. So we need to get to our final thoughts.
Yes, thank you. And let us get you out of there safely.
But that would be Arnie first. Arnie, if you want to say something in closing to our audience, now would be the time.
Sure. First, thank you all for coming and thanks for having me here. It's been a lot of fun. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from the Bund. I didn't know if I was writing a drama or a farce when I was writing this thing. It was, but the lessons we learned from them and how we can stand up to them, I think still apply and very well. And if people want to get a hold of me, ask me other questions, feel free. You can find me very easily on the internet.
Thank you, Arnie. Ben?
I would say similarly that sometimes when I'm looking at a subject, I start from today. And when we were making the film ahead of the 2020 presidential race, I couldn't imagine the press being more volatile, and the forces behind it being more divisive at any point in history. And it was that curiosity that led me to ask, how the hell did we get here? I think it's a question that people are asking even more fervently, more loudly now. And it's why this kind of film and this kind of discussion we're having becomes all the more important.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah,
I'm going to refrain from my final thoughts in order that Olivia can exit peacefully from the library. Olivia.
No, Felix, absolutely. Let's have some brief final thoughts from you. We do have a couple of minutes.
Well, one thing, it's not exactly a non sequitur, but one thing I get from this discussion and also the book and film is to be vigilant of developments within our society, and also to hone a sense of objectivity. I myself have to practice letting go of my ego in order to stay objective about what I believe I'm seeing, so that my sense of reality, I feel good about, and my moral compass as well. When we get a little overexcited, Winchell is a good example of someone who lost sight of that, and in moments his ego became resulted in vindictiveness. Now is a very heated time. In order to stay calm, I hone to objectivity and
Okay,
reality.
so that's a nice note to end on. Thanks, everybody, and see you all in October. Have a safe Yom Kippur holiday. Hope you have an easy fast for those who do. See you soon. Be well. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.